So let's now talk about the junction between the cornea and the limbus, or the cornea and sclera, which is called the corneoscleral limbus. So what is the corneoscleral limbus? It is a transitional zone. It's about 1 to 2 millimeters behind the transparent cornea and the opaque sclera, which is covered by the conjunctiva. The importance, or what one of the main important features of the limbus that it will carry within it is the trabecular meshwork and the canal of Schlemm. And what are the functions of trabecular meshwork and the canal of Schlemm? This will be responsible for drainage of aqueous humor, which is the forming the intraocular pressure. We have the corneoscleral limbus, which is 1 millimeter anteriorly than the conjunctival limbus. So we have two types of limbus, or the corneoscleral limbus is more anterior, while there is a part of the limbus posterior called the conjunctival limbus, located 1 millimeter posterior. Let's now have a clear idea about the anatomy of the limbus. So here is the cornea, here is the lens, the iris, and this is the sclera, and this is the ciliary body, section of the ciliary body. This is called the iris root, which is the junction between the iris to the sclera, to what's called the scleral spur. So scleral spur meaning that there is a whitish area of bulge of sclera here. It's called scleral spur. So let's know what are the important anatomical landmarks of the limbus. We have what's called anterior limbal border. So the anterior limbal border, it is the anterior just the termination of the Bowman's and Descemet. We have just said that in the cornea, the Descemet and the Descemet and the endothelium, the Descemet and the Bowman's layer just terminate abruptly at the limbus, and they are no longer exist into the conjunctiva. If we join the termination between both of them, this will be called the anterior limbal border. And this will mark the anterior limit of the limbus. While the mid-limbal line is a line overlying the Schwalb's line. What is the Schwalb's line? So the Descemet membrane in the cornea will terminate abruptly at the limbus and will start the Schwalb's line. So the Schwalb's line is a whitish line that is mark the termination of the Descemet membrane. So the Descemet membrane end by the Schwalb's line. Overlying the Schwalb's line, if we have this line overlying the Schwalb's line, this is called the mid-limbal line. Finally, the posterior limit of the limbus will be called the posterior limbal border. And the posterior limbal border, it is a line perpendicular to the surface. This is a line perpendicular to the surface that pass into the scleral spur and the iris root. So if we pass a line perpendicular to the surface of the cornea and the sclera that pass through the scleral spur and pass through the iris root, this will be called the posterior limbal border. These borders are important to differentiate the limbus into zones. So for what's called the blue zone, the blue zones is the distance between the anterior limbal border to the mid limbal border, and it will overlie clear cornea. While the white zone, it is 1 millimeter between the mid-limbal line and the posterior limbal border, and it will contain the trabecular meshwork, or will overlie the trabecular meshwork. So this is the blue zone and the white zone. From the anterior limbal border to the posterior limbal border, this is called the surgical limbus, which is 2 millimeters between the anterior limbal border and the posterior limbal border. While the anatomical limbus is just the Schwalb's line. So the Schwalb's line, or the plane of the Schwalb's line, this is called anatomical limbus. So let's have again idea about what are the differences. So the anterior limbal border and the blue zone is between anterior limbal border and the mid limbal border. The white zone between the mid limbal and posterior limbal. Surgical limbus is between the anterior limbal border and posterior limbal border, and the white zone, or the anatomical limbus, it is made by Schwalb's line. And here is the section in case as we do the subscleral trabeculectomy, so we be able to identify the blue zone and white zone. So here is the scleral spur, and here is the blue zone, which is located between the anterior limbal border and the mid limbal border, while from the mid limbal border to the posterior limbal border will be the white zone. So this is called the blue zone and the white zone, which will be just 1 millimeter, and the blue zone will be 1 millimeter, and the white zone will be 1 millimeter. Both of them will be called 2 millimeters or the surgical limbus. So again, anterior limbal line will join the termination of the Bowman's layer and the dismus membrane, which both will end abruptly at the cornea, at the limbus, while the posterior limbal border will be a perpendicular line to the surface that join the scleral spur or the iris root from here. Between both the anterior limbal border and the posterior limbal border, there will be a mid-limbal line overlying the Schwalb's line. The distance between the anterior limbal border to the mid-limbal line will be called the blue zone. From the mid-limbal line to the posterior limbal border will be called the white zone. The surgical limbus will be the distance between the anterior limbal border and posterior limbal border. And finally, the anatomical limbus will be overlying the Schwalb's line here. So the gross anatomy of the limbus, that is the color of the limbus, is dark in pigmented races, and it has a well vascularized formed by the conjunctival branches of the anterior ciliary arteries and contain myelinated nerve fibers. With more insight into the histology or the microscopic structure of the limbus, we have the limbus is formed by stratified squamous non-keratinized epithelium. The deep cells are cylindrical, with the middle cells are polygonal, superficial cells that looks flat and resting on a basement membrane. This basement membrane is wavy, as you can see here, with many folds. So if you for the first instance, when you look at it, you may think of it like a dermal papillae or a section in the skin, but this is just a section into the limbus, and these folds are called palisades of Vogt. So here are the palisades of Vogt. So again, palisades of Vogt are these radial folds of the of the basement membrane of the limbus. Then after this, the stroma is an area in which will be a transition from the normal arrangement of the corneal lamellae into the irregular or oblique irregular arrangement of the scleral fibril lamellae. So the regular corneal lamellae becomes more oblique. Just an important clinical aspect about the palisades of Vogt. So here is the location of palisades of Vogt. As you can see, like enfoldings of the location of the corneal limbus. And it has an important aspect, clinical and surgical aspect, as the presence of healthy palisades of Vogt denote that there is normal stem cells. So stem cells of the cornea, which are responsible for regeneration of the corneal epithelium, originate from the stem cells. And this, if there is a deficiency in the stem cells, like for any cicatrizing corneal disease or any chemical trauma, this will lead to creeping of the conjunctiva over the cornea, or what's called the conjunctivalization of the cornea, as we can see here. So this occurs in many conditions like trachoma, ocular cicatricial pemphigoid, Stevens-Johnson syndrome, chemical injury. And this will be due to limbal cell deficiency, and will be and we can anticipate this by presence of improper or poor palisades of Vogt. And this also has an important clinical aspect in pterygium surgery. So if we have a pterygium, then we need to remove it. So the pterygium usually has occurred in the first place due to absence of limbal stem cells, which act as a barrier for the pterygium to creep over the cornea. So if we remove the pterygium, then there will be destruction of the already destructed stem cells. So the most important or the most successful method for reconstruction or to prevent the pterygium recurrence is to do conjunctival autograft with stem cell transplant. So we take stem cells from the same eye and implant it here so that it can prevent the recurrence of the pterygium. Here we come to the changes that occur at the limbus. So the cornea has 5 layers. What is the fate of these 5 layers when it will be moved to the sclera? So as a general rule from nowadays, from now and later on, any slide that has changes is very important. So it is asked frequently in the exam. Changes that occur at the limbus, changes that occur at the ora serrata, changes that occurs at the in the iris and the uvea that we will talk about in the uvea. Any changes are very important. So what are the changes that occur at the limbus? The epithelium lose its regularity and become continuous with the conjunctival epithelium that contain goblet cells and lymphatics. So the conjunctival epithelium doesn't have to be clear or doesn't have to maintain transparency, and it has other structures or other function, like secretion of the mucinous part of the or mucin layer of the tear film, which comes from the goblet cells and represent the major area of lymphatics in the eye. So the epithelium becomes irregular and has more goblet cells and lymphatics. Bowman's ends abruptly, as we said. The stroma will lose its regularity and the collagen fibrils become variable in diameter. Dismus membrane again will end abruptly and start as a Schwab's line. So remember that dismus membrane end in the corneal limbus and start as a Schwab's line, which will mark the beginning of trabecular meshwork. Endothelium will be continuous as the endothelium that cover the trabecular meshwork. So again, here is the epithelium of the cornea become here at the limbus. You see that increase in thickness, the layers become more irregular in shape, more irregular in size, and so the epithelium lose its regularity and they become continuous with the conjunctival epithelium that may have this goblet cells. They will have goblet cells and have lymphatics. So these are not present into the corneal epithelium. The Bowman's layer end abruptly and it has no continuation into the limbus. So this is not the Bowman's. This is just the epithelium again. The stroma of the epithelium or the stroma of the cornea will continue into the limbus, but the collagen lamellae will be more oblique as they will be more irregular and variable in size and variable in diameter. The dismus membrane will end abruptly and will start, the Schwab's line will start to mark the termination of the dismus membrane, mark the termination of the trabecular meshwork, and finally the endothelium will continue as the endothelial lining of the canal of Schlemm, or continue as the endothelial lining of the trabecular meshwork, which is the most outer layer just adherent to the canal of Schlemm. As we said, the blood vessels at the limbus will be coming from the anterior conjunctival branches of the anterociliary arteries.